I'm Dineen, and I host and produce 3 different healthcare podcasts. My first is Insight Says, a mental health podcast. Second is Advancing Dentistry. And the third is my main show, DNA Today, where I explore genetics and how it impacts our health. Most of my episodes are interviews with genetic counselors, researchers, patient advocates. My favorite episodes tend to be those with patient advocates because they bring so much passion to raising awareness for their conditions and are really great educators with empowering stories to share. They've come from often a place of not having a scientific background to having to be experts in their condition or their child's condition. So it's very interesting to hear their perspective and everything that they've been through to get to that point. I've also done episodes about genetic research, obviously rare diseases, like I was talking about, genetic testing, which can include direct consumer tests like Ancestry and 23andMe, hereditary cancer syndromes, even advice on how to become a genetic counselor. So plenty of areas of interest like these. A goal of mine is to have the episodes understandable by the general public. It is also a radio show, so I never know quite exactly who is listening to the show, and I want to make it accessible to everyone. During episodes, I break down this complicated genetic information into simpler language that really anyone can understand. I've been podcasting since high school, which for me was back in 2011. It's been a very rewarding experience to build up my genetic show since 2012 and also expand into different shows. I'm close to hitting the 200 mark of podcast episodes I've hosted and produced, which is really exciting to be close to that landmark. And it's given me energy to keep recording more. And I think I'm going to be in the podcast industry for a long time. Podcasting is such a unique platform to be able to connect with a specific audience, and I like the idea of capturing people's voices and their stories to be able to offer commentary on these issues and topics. It's very personable, and when you listen, you really feel like you know the hosts and the guests. At the time when I started in 2012, it wasn't a saturated market, which it's starting to become now, but there's still way less podcasts than blogs or other similar types of media. So way less competition there. I also love that it's free for people to listen to, which allows me to reach far more people than if I was on a platform where people had to pay a subscription. I share on social media primarily. I also started exploring doing crossover episodes with other related podcasts. It's another great way to meet more people in the community and share your listeners of my show will maybe listen to the other show and vice versa. I found creating content people are looking for has helped immensely as they find it while they're doing their own research and end up finding my podcast. In terms of social media, I've found Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn to be the most active sites for my listeners and for new listeners to discover my shows. Least effective for me has been Facebook, just because my audience tends to be on the younger side and they're not on Facebook as much as an older audience, so I don't invest as much time on there. When I started becoming more active on my Instagram for my podcast, I needed a way to share my new episodes. At first, I just did promotional images from Canva, but once I found out about Headliner, it was a complete game changer because people could actually hear a teaser from an episode. And after that, people are way more intrigued to listen to the full episode after hearing that short clip. So it's become a great way to share the show on all platforms. Started on Instagram, but now I post it everywhere. I use probably the most popular microphone for podcasters, the Blue Yeti. I have a pop filter and a mic arm to connect onto the microphone. And I use MacBook Pro and have a program that records my Skype calls, which I then edit in GarageBand. I use one of the older versions that still supports podcasting because I found the newer ones are really focused on music. And I've found it really helpful to have a couple monitors while recording for multitasking so I can see my Skype conversation. I can also see my episode outline and other things. As for my website building and hosting, I use Squarespace and then GoDaddy for my domain name. When I started podcasting, my setup was very basic. I was using a Logitech microphone, which was actually propped on a pile of books. I think it was the entire Harry Potter series, which my co-host and I would kind of congregate and sit around. And in post-production, I use Sony Audio Editor, if I recall correctly. So I've definitely grown from there. I wanted to make sure I was interested in podcasting before I committed to the equipment, but it's been 8 years now, so I think I've gotten my money's worth. An aspect of podcasting I think is underrated is investing time in learning about your guest. So, reading their book, listening to their talks, looking through their social media to see what they're posting about and what opinions they have, whatever is out there for you to gain an understanding of their message and really be able to pull upon that during an interview. Oftentimes, it takes me way longer to prepare for an interview than to record it. Sometimes it's a book that's hundreds of pages long, but I think it's so worth spending that time. The interviews where I've invested a lot more of this time are more in depth, and I think as a host, you look much more knowledgeable. As for something that's overrated, I'm not a fan of the Apple Podcast app. I prefer using Overcast. It's much more customizable and organized. I don't know if this is a popular opinion, but I found it to be much easier to use. If someone asked which episode they should listen to from one of my shows, I would suggest my 100th episode of DNA Today. I interviewed award-winning author Carl Zimmer. He writes the Matter column for the New York Times and teaches science writing at Yale University. Our episode, we discuss the concept of heredity, which is explored in his most recent book, She Has Her Mother's Laugh. And our conversation, he brought up so many interesting concepts that expanded the way I view inheritance. We explored the human interest behind wanting to know our own ancestry and really the drive there. We also took a step back to look at the history of understanding heredity and how that has shifted over time and what the definition is and what it includes. Does that include culture or not? Overall, very interesting and thought-provoking conversation. My favorite podcast is a really tough question because I listen to so many podcasts and so many different podcasts. But if I had to choose one, I would say Millennial. It's not the same genre of podcast I produce, which maybe is why I like it. It's a little break from what I'm normally doing. A couple of the hosts, Andrew Sims and Laura T., I've been listening to for over 10 years, so almost half my life. They have been an inspiration of mine to become a podcaster. And I've learned so much about politics, news, and life in general from them with the various shows they've hosted over the last decade. So I really hope they continue to podcast for a long time. My question for the next headline or highlight is, how do you expand your show's reach? What have you found to be effective methods to grow your listener base, and whether that is investing money or if there are more economic ways that you've accomplished this?